Okay, we're on Nun Beis Lemon Beis 52B3. Va'od Sha'ah. Right, you have it. The first column, 52B3. Va'od Sha'ah. Shamati Shecholkin Be'machat Lamachat. The student that we were introduced yesterday to a Talmud Echad, a certain student from the Upper Galilee, is Rabbi Eliezer. So here we are in the land of Israel. He asked Rabbi Eliezer the following question. Shamati shachulkin b'machat l'machat. There is some halachic difference between different types of needles. Needle number one and needle number two. But he didn't know regarding what aspect is there this difference between needles. But there's many halachot. There's laws of Shabbat. There's laws of Tumah. There's many different situations and that in halacha that there could be a difference, a possible difference. But where was this halachic difference? He didn't remember that there is in what situation the rabbi that he heard from stated that there's a difference. So he is asking the question, Mori Adam, where is this difference? Amalei, we are on 52b3. So he told him, Shema lo shamat ela l'inyan Shabbat. Maybe you heard regarding Shabbat, regarding the laws of Shabbat, there are differences. If a person goes out with a needle that doesn't have a hole, is considered more like let's say, I presume more like a piece of jewelry. It's like more like a pin, and maybe it would only be a rabbinic prohibition of going out with such a needle stuck into your uh, collar or whatever. But if it has a hole in it, that's not made for jewelry. It's just made for it's made for a needle to sew. So then it's a fancy way of carrying, as we explained yesterday. Adam, if you want to send it to the group, thank you very much. And that's what the rabbi said back. Rabbi Eliezer said, maybe you heard a distinction regarding Shabbat. If it has a hole in the needle, then it's a sewing needle. It's carrying. Doesn't have a hole in the needle, then it's more like a piece of jewelry. So therefore, on a Torah level, it's not a problem if you're wearing a piece of jewelry on Shabbat. But regarding Tumah, regarding contamination, da v'da achati. Regarding contamination, regarding laws of contamination, they both have the same law, whether it has a hole in the needle, doesn't have a hole in the needle, it will be able to receive contamination, right? Because if it's a needle that's a sewing needle is a complete item, 52b3. A complete item receives contamination. And if it's a piece of jewelry, we said a jewelry for a person also receives contamination. So regarding contamination, there's no difference. Now we're talking a lot about contamination. Today it doesn't really apply to us in practical sense so much as contamination because we're not handling truma, we're not handling masa sheni, we're not handling things, we're not handling kachim, we're not going into the Beit HaMikdash. So a lot of things that would have great ramifications, you know, we don't have those, doesn't apply to us, so that's something you have to realize. We mentioned about nida. I was just learning with someone this last week that when the Torah talks about nida, the woman who has a monthly period, It talks about contamination, but there's like 2 points to the nidah. And when the lady, good morning, Asaf, when the lady has a monthly period, she becomes contaminated. She can't go into the Beit HaMikdash during that time period, let's say for 7 days, and she can't touch Truma, right? She's Tameh. But that aspect of Nidah is not relevant to us today because we're not going into a Beit HaMikdash, we're not handling Truma, we're not handling Kachim. But the aspect of Nidah, of being intimate with one's spouse, that's applicable today. So that point that the Torah forbids a man to be intimate with his wife while she's in Nidah, that applies today. So that's just interesting to note regarding the Nidah. It has one aspect that it's not so practical today. Be'ez Hashem, is going to become practical very soon. We should merit the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And then when the ladies and Nidah, it will be very much more practical in addition to the intimacy, be very practical regarding Tumah. So here we're talking a lot about Tumah and the Gemara, so we need to remember the context of what that was discussed. So the Gemara says, "L'inyan Tumah davada achati." Regarding Tumah, are you going to tell me that it is has the same law, that a needle with a hole, all needles are the same? Vatanan, we have a Mishnah. Macha shenita chura. Let's say you have a needle that the hole of the needle, the eye of the needle, was removed. Let's say it broke the place of the needle where the eye is. When uksa, or the uksa is, let's say, the sharp point of the needle. The sharp point the point of the needle was removed. Tahora, we say that the needle is tahor. It no longer it's not able to receive contamination. It's a broken utensil. And if it was already contaminated, now it's no longer contaminated because it's broken. It's a different utensil. It's a broken utensil. So if you have a utensil, like we learned, if you have something that's utensil, we said, but in order for something to receive contamination, either we said if it's not a complete utensil, doesn't receive contamination. We said if it was a utensil and then which is able to receive contamination, and let's say it is, even if it did receive contamination, but once it breaks, then it's no longer receiving contamination. Contamination is gone because it's in a broken state. So we see that even a needle, so it has two powers. When it breaks, it takes it away the ability to receive contamination, and it removes the contamination if it had one on it. So we see needles, there's a difference between a needle that's whole and a needle that's not whole. A whole needle receives contamination, it's built to receive contamination, and a non-whole needle, a needle that the hole was removed, is not able to receive contamination. Remember, if you have a needle, a beautiful needle, sewing needle, it's not tamei, it's not contaminated. Nothing came in contact with it contaminated. But it has the ability to receive contamination once the needle is complete. If you have a needle that was not completed yet, it cannot receive contamination in that state. If it was completed and then let's say somehow a dead mouse came in contact with it and subsequently, or was in the tent of a dead body, and subsequently the eye of the needle was removed, it's no longer contaminated. So we see there are differences between needles. So how could Rabbi Eliezer say that regarding needles, there's no difference regarding contamination? Good morning, Simon. So the Gemara says, Kikomale b'shlema. When did he say there's no difference in needles? Right, Simon? We're saying that the rabbi said there's no difference in halacha regarding contamination by needles if the needle is whole. A whole needle. If you have a whole needle, that there's no difference, which seems to indicate between a whole needle that has a hole in it, whole WHOLE, that has an HOLE in it, a whole needle, a machat that has a hole in it, what we'll call an eye. An needle that's complete that has an eye, or needle that's not complete, there is another needle that's complete that doesn't have an eye, but it's just as a needle to as a let's say to it's used as an adornment, as a piece of jewelry, that is a pin, something that is both will receive contamination. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara wants to say when it comes to a needle, all needles that are complete, not that its eye was removed, that it's not complete, or not that you are still in the manufacturing process, that's not complete. A needle that's reached completion, all needles that have reached completion have the same halachic status, whether it has a hole in it, whether it doesn't have a hole, whether it has an eye in it, has no eye in it, as long as it's complete. As long as it's complete, it will have the ability to receive contamination. So the Gemara challenges that. Simon, we are on 52b3 on the top column, second column, 52b3. The Gemara says, you're telling me when it's complete, they'll have the same halacha, but not. We have a law, metal rust, right? You have an old needle. Because sometimes after a while, it could bring up a lot of rust in the needle, right? Like Simon, you ever see those old needles? So, machat she'elata chaluda. If you have a needle that brought up a lot of rust, probably it wasn't used in a long time. I gave a tefira, if the dust affects the stitching, tahora. So then it's like in a certain sense, I would say it's broken. If you have rust, that's gonna inhibit, if that's the right word, if it's going to badly affect the stitching. So that's considered that's a broken needle. And therefore it's not worthy to be used. It's broken, and therefore it will not receive contamination. Even if it already received contamination, once it reaches this level of rustiness that it's affected by it, that it affects the stitching, it's not going to receive it. The contamination would leave. Bimlav, if the rust is not really it's rusty, but it's not affecting the stitching, then it's tameya. Then it's in the status, it has the ability to receive contamination because it's a complete item, it's not broken. For Omri, the Rabbi Yanai says, Uhu Sharishuma Nika. Yanai says, some say that when we say that if the rust does not affect the stitching, well, let's say the first statement of the Mishnah. We said it's going on the first statement. Some say, I'm going to go with this explanation, that if the rust affects the stitching, then the needle is considered ineffective, it's considered broken. What is called, he says, you know what's called affecting the stitching? If every time if you stitch with it, it's going to leave a little rust on the garment that you're stitching onto. That's also called affecting meaning to say, if there's so much rust that you can't stitch with it because it's like another layer on top of and it doesn't really go in well into the garment. It's like holding back the stitch from going through. That of course would be considered a broken needle. You can't stitch. If there's so much rust, you can't put the thing through the thing. But he's explaining, you know what it means to say, even if you could stitch with it. But what does it mean to have a negative effect, inhibiting, hurting the stitching, it's affecting the stitching means that when you stitch with it, the dirt, the rust goes onto the garment. You're stitching your garment, stitching your pants, now you can have rust on your pants because the needle has rust on it. That's also called a broken needle. If you're going to use a needle, Simon, it's gonna leave its mark, right, Asaf? Right, Ralph? It will leave its mark on. That's not a needle. It's a broken needle. That's one of the ways some explain the Gemara. That's Rabbi Yana, who should its mark is recognizable on the garment, meaning the rust is recognizable. But at the end of the day, we see that we have a needle that has rust on it, and we say if that rust is an amount that will have a negative, it will hurt the stitching, we say it is Torah. We say it's not received contamination, this needle. So even though it's a whole needle, it has an eye in the needle, the top of the needle is not broken, the eye is not broken, and yet we say a whole needle, it does not receive contamination. Morning. It doesn't receive contamination, and you told me there's no difference between needles. So the Gemara regarding contamination, the Gemara shoots back. Listen, it might be whole, but it's not smooth. So when we say there's no difference between needles, that means if the needle is complete, that means it's complete and smooth. But a needle that's complete and not smooth, we're not talking about that type of needle. When the rabbi said, remember the Ezra said, because that's obvious, that's like a broken needle. When the rabbi said there's no difference between needles, he's referring to a whole needle, smooth needle. There's no difference if it has an eye. If you made the needle with an eye, you made the needle without an eye. As long as it's there to remain that way, that's the complete needle. Sometimes you want to make a needle, a pointy item without an eye. That's fine. Ki kamalei, the Gemara says b'shifa kamalei. When he says there's no difference, it's in a smooth needle. So then the Gemara shoots back. B'shifa davida achati. When it's a shifa, when it's a smooth needle, they have the same halachic status regarding contamination. But Tanya went to the Braita, machat b'nekuva b'nei. If you have a needle, whether it has a hole, whether it doesn't have a hole, mutar l'taltala b'shus hayachid. Shabbat. You can move it on Shabbat. Now, I would say like a needle should be a muksa item, right? On Shabbat, can I move a needle? A needle that's made for to stitch, right? You have a needle that's made to stitch, right? To sew something. So sewing is a forbidden act that I can't do on Shabbat. Right, Adam? Right? Can I sew on Shabbat? No. I can't stitch on Shabbat. So therefore that needle is considered, I'm separated from that needle on Shabbat. It's something that's mukseh, it's separated from me. Just like money is separated from me on Shabbat. I don't use money on Shabbat. I have no use for money on Shabbat. The general use of money is to purchase, the wheel and deal. I can't handle money on Shabbat. So a needle is like a screwdriver. What do you do with a screwdriver on Shabbat? What in general? You build with a screwdriver. Can I build on Shabbat? I can't on Shabbat. So I'm separated, so it's mukseh, that item I'm separated from. But even though the needle is it's used for forbidden purposes, but needles also, if I have a splinter, it has a use to take out a splinter. And because I can take out a splinter with it, so it's a multi-purpose item. So it would be muksa. Its muksa would be a level of kli shemalachto isur, a utensil that it's standing to do forbidden acts, which you're allowed to move it if you need to use it for a permitted purpose. Like we gave the example, if you have a hammer on Shabbat, a hammer is used to bang in nails generally. A hammer is a muksa item, correct, Simon? Right, Ralph? A hammer is muksa. But If I have a walnut, big, nice, big walnut, I want to crack it open, I could use the hammer technically on Shabbat to crack open the walnut. I could take the hammer, pick it up, crack the walnut, put the hammer down, and now put it down. Back, I can't just move it without a purpose to use unless I have a purpose to use the hammer. I can't move a hammer if the sun is shining on the hammer. I want to get it out of the sun. That would be forbidden type of movement. If I can move a hammer to use the hammer itself, or if I need the place of the hammer, I can move the hammer. We spoke about the difference between money. I think we spoke about money and some certain types of other cases of muktzah. But you say money, we said is a higher level muktzah. If I need the place where the money is, let's say I left the money on the table, I left the dollar bill on the table. I can't just pick up the money because I need the place. I have to knock off the money with my elbow in some unusual way if I want to move it away. But when it comes to a hammer, if I left the hammer on the table, I can just pick up the hammer because since it has permitted it's a lower level muktzah, I could pick up the hammer if I need the place. I could pick up the hammer if I need to use the hammer in a permitted fashion. I can't pick up the money because I want to use the money to hold the place on my as a bookmark. I can't pick up the money because I want to go ahead and because I want the place. I could knock it away in an unusual manner. That's not called movement. So the Gemara is saying, machat bein nekuva, bein she'ein nekuva, whether it has a hole in the needle, whether it doesn't have a hole in the needle, mutar l'taltal b'Shabbat. Good morning. You can move it on Shabbat in private domain because we say it has a permitted use. So the Gemara says, and v'lo armina nekuva ela le'inyan tuma bovad. That which we say that a needle that has a hole in it is different than there's a difference between a needle that has a hole than a needle that doesn't have a hole is el inyan tuma bavad regarding contamination, meaning to say whether a needle has a hole in it, whether it doesn't have a hole in it, I could use that needle to take out a splinter. I can move it, take out a splinter. So regarding movement on Shabbat, there's no difference. Regarding the needle with a hole in it, I got a splinter. I got to use the needle, take out the splinter. But where is there a difference in a hole and not a hole? Regarding contamination, a needle that doesn't have a hole is susceptible to receive contamination. Sorry, needle that doesn't have a hole, it's not receiving contamination. Needle that has a hole does receive contamination. So we see that we have a needle, no rust, seems to be a complete needle, right? Meaning we're saying that this needle that we say which you could use to remove the splinter we're saying it's not receiving contamination. So we see that there's a difference between a needle regarding and another, both needles regarding one needle and the other needle regarding contamination. You told me, you said in Rabbi Eliezer that needles, there's no difference between all needles that are whole there's no difference regarding contamination, and all needles that are whole have the ability to receive contamination. We see that there is a difference in a needle that has a hole and doesn't have a hole. Needle that doesn't have a hole does not receive contamination. A receiver that does have a hole does receive contamination. So the Gemara says, Targum Abaye Aliba de Rava, we're talking about begulmi. What does that mean? When does the Braisa say that a needle that does not have a hole does not receive contamination? We're talking when the needle is still in the process, you still plan on making a hole in the needle. The needle is not yet, the manufacturing process is not over. Since it's not over, so therefore it's not going to receive contamination because it's not complete. So therefore that's not called a complete needle. And therefore, there could be, it's like anything that's not complete, it's not going to receive contamination. But regarding moving on a Shabbat, since sometimes you'll change your mind and you'll leave it as that at that state for a to take at that at that state, like Rashi says a needle that's standing to be make a hole in it, as long as you didn't make a hole, you plan on making a hole, it does not be able to receive contamination. Because in order for it to receive contamination, we said the prerequisite has to be complete. The work is complete. If it's not complete, because kli maaseh, it has to be that it's a utensil of that the whole you finish the manufacturing process of that item in order for it to receive contamination. But regarding Shabbat, to move it, it's not considered mukseh that you wouldn't be able to move if you needed to take out a splinter, because sometimes you'll use it as your tweezer. Sometimes you'll use it as a needle to get out a splinter. So since let's say I made the needle, right? I have a needle. I plan on making a hole in it because I want to use it for what? For sewing. But you know what? It's possible. I know myself. I might change my mind. I might just leave it as is and use it as is to remove my splinters. Therefore, it's not like I separated my mind from it so much that it has that status of mukseh. Regarding mukseh, it's not mukseh. But a needle that's complete, let's say if I have a needle that's complete, that I don't plan on making a hole in it. I'm going to use it as a tweezer. I'm going to use that needle, take out splinters. There's no difference regarding contamination. All needles, like all men created equal, that's right, that famous line. All needles are the same. Regarding if it's a complete needle, that's the rabbi says. When the rabbi says all needles receive contamination when it's complete, when it's smooth, what does that mean? If you have if you finish making the needle and you don't plan on doing anything more, you don't plan on making an eye in the needle, a hole in the needle, you're going to use it as a tweezer, it receives contamination because that is a complete item. Okay, so now you got about the needles, Simon, right? You know all about needles now. You know about needles regarding Shabbat, regarding Mukseh, regarding contamination. Now we got a new Mishnah. Okay. Chamo Yotzei Merdat. We're speaking about, as you know, this parak is Bameh Behema Yotzei. The parak is discussing, as you know, you can't work on Shabbat. You can't carry from private domain to public domain unless there's an Eruv. So your animal is also restricted. Your Torah says you have to make sure your animal is resting on Shabbat. It's a day of rest, not only for you, it's a day of rest for your animal. So we said the animal can only be wearing things, going out with things on its body on Shabbat from private to public. If it's not considered something extra, if it's not considered something like, if it's not part, as long as it's part of the animal, if the animal's wearing clothing to keep it warm, that's part of the animal. It's not called carrying, just like by human being. It's not called carrying. If the animal is wearing many will say, might not be universal, but many say that if the animal is wearing a normal type of jewelry that you like to dress up the animal, not as a jewelry, not as a clothing, but just make the animal look pretty, right? It's some sort of jewelry you put around it, some sort of necklace. It's a common necklace to put around the animal. So many say that's also not a problem. Just like a human being we could wear a necklace. Again, I don't want anyone to equate human beings and animals. They're not. Even though we're comparing it and we're going to these halachot, but we're living in a time period to give more honor to animals than people. Someone I know very well is very disgusted when they see animals in baby carriages. I've gone on record of that, right, madam, many times. You always laugh. You laugh, Simon, but because you're from my generation. But the new generation, I'm sorry to say, you live because right, you are right, Simon. But the people are really they're bad shape, Simon. Because for a lot of people, that became their child.
Exactly. This is their child.
They consider it like their baby. It's a rachmanos. You know, here the rachmanos. God should have mercy on them. They should see the light. But many of them are Jewish people, not religious Jews that bought into the culture. And now, so we're saying that an animal could go out with those type of things on Shabbat. It's not called carrying. Animal can't go out with a load on Shabbat, right? Can't carry a load, can't get anything that's not part. We spoke about the animal wearing some sort of restraints. That helps protect the animal. You can restrain the animal. We said you could, spoke about the normal restraints, right? If you have an excessive restraint, we have a discussion about that. A low level restraint that doesn't do anything, we said that's called carrying. But those are some of the Gemaras that we discussed. So now we're getting into the saddle cloth. Saddle cloth is something that the animal wears underneath its saddle to keep it warm. The donkeys are cold even in the summer. An interesting phenomenon. And obviously they saw that the animals are much more comfortable when it has this saddle cloth on. So the saddle cloth is like other clothing of the animal that's there to protect it from the cold. And that is, so, also some people say it's there to protect, the saddle cloth, the saddle from scratching into the flesh um, of the animal. And they would put the saddle cloth on even if there's no saddle, even if there's no, and you want to protect, like you have a little cushion. You're protecting the animal from the saddle, or you're protecting the animal from the load by putting this saddle cloth underneath. But people, they would put the saddle cloth on the animal even when there is no load, even when there's no um, saddle, because to keep it warm, like we said, because the nature of donkeys is to feel cold even in the summer. And I'm wondering, old people, a lot of times old people feel cold a lot when it comes to different with air conditioning, keeping a room cold, proper temperature. And you have older people and younger people in the room. You see if the young people want the air conditioner on, the windows open. They want whatever, windows open meaning when it's cold outside, they want the windows open. And when it's summertime, they really want it. They want the air conditioner on high. And you have an older person at the table, they generally they don't like the air conditioner on too much. They don't want the window open, right? Everyone knows what I'm talking about. So it's interesting that Hashem made it that the nature of a donkey is that it's always cold, even in the summer. And maybe it's to think about that, what, there's different natures Hashem made, and in the same way you have to be understanding of the donkey in the summer to keep it warm. You have to be understanding of the people that get cold, and that are cold in the summer too. The older people. Just something to think about a little bit. Making a pitch on behalf of the older people. Chamar yotzem radat. So we're saying that the donkey could go out on Shabbat with the saddle cloth. The saddle cloth is like it serves its purpose, meaning even though most probably the chidush is, what's the novelty? What's the mission telling us? That even though a lot of the time the reason for the saddle cloth is because to protect it from the load scratching. Well, the saddle cloth is serving to protect, from the saddle scratching. That, that might be, and a load, can't go out with a load on Shabbat. So you might say that this is not really part of the animal. Not, you might have said maybe you will not be able to go with the saddle cloth, something extra. But the fact that the saddle cloth serves the purpose independent of protecting from the load, from the scratching, or independent protecting, good morning, the saddle from making a scratch onto the body of the animal, but it serves as to warm the animal. So the fact that it has that purpose, that dual purpose, that it also serves to warm the animal, I presume that is what's going to make it part of the animal. And now it's not called the animal's carrying something. If the animal is wearing, if it would seem most probably if the saddle cloth would only serve as a purpose to protect the animal from a load, to protect the animal um from the saddle, from most probably that might have been considered not part of the animal in the sense that you're going to allow it to go out on Shabbat with it. But maybe because it's serving always serves to keep it has a purpose of the warmth. It needs its warmth, even in the summertime. So therefore, it's not considered a load, and therefore it could go out with it on Shabbat. But the Mishnah states it has to have another condition. Zman shikashurabo. It has to be tied. Meaning if the saddle cloth is not tied on, now the Gemara is going to have to explain. One of the malachot on Shabbat, you're not going to make a knot. You're not going to tie a knot like there's something called a professional knot, a permanent knot, all different types of knots that you can't make. On a Torah level, you can't make certain knots. On a rabbinic level, there's certain knots you can't make. Like also, you can't untie. A permanent knot cannot be untied. There's certain laws of untying and tying. So obviously we're talking about when it was tied, it could have, what type of tying. Then the Gemara is going to explain, we're talking about it was tied before Shabbat. You could go out with this saddle if the knot was tied before Shabbat, and we'll see more about that tomorrow. I want to wish everyone a great day. Ralph? Great day, Asaf, a great day.
Thank you, you too.
And tonight is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh.
Oh,
Beautiful Rosh Chodesh.
okay. You reminded me.
Adam Yochanan gets the credit. He was the one who mentioned it.